Ladies and gentlemen, you are locked in with the Fourth and Frames crew, where 60% of the time we give you championship winning advice every time. I'm Rhett Manuel here with Nate Markham, Drew Scott, and Aiden Weingartner as we go through our way too early top 12 quarterback rankings for the 2025 season. Where while we give you 60% of every time championship advice, we also give you 166 and 2/3 chance of winning your fantasy football championship. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get it popping.
This should be played at high volume, preferably in a residential area.
Rhett, I gotta admit, you had the opportunity there to go out with the holler if you hear me, if you're gonna follow Steiner math. But it's okay. I was on the fly. That was solid. I love it.
And you know what? After people hear my quarterback rankings for tonight, they may think Steiner math is involved. But before we get into that, guys, welcome to Fourth and Frames. And also, do not forget, if you were watching with us tonight, do not forget to like, subscribe, and review anytime a new podcast from Fantasy and Frames crew drops, or a short for that matter. And you could search for any and all of our podcasts here at Fantasy and Frames by name wherever you listen to podcasts. But for us, make sure to subscribe to the Fourth and Frames podcast, and also lock in at fantasyandframes.com for the latest weekly IDP and Dynasty rankings, articles, takes, news and notes. Rookie draft season is hot and heavy right now, so we got things going on over there right now too with all of those things. But I'm going to go ahead and start off with Aiden. Aiden, how are you tonight, man?
Oh man, I'm great. I just did the a couple hours ago the Dynasty show with JT and Jorge. That was great. And now I'm ready to shift my focus to some redraft and some way too early redraft rankings. I know it's only beginning of May, but it's going to be fun to look at these rankings, man, and how they change over the next few summer months. So it's going to be fun in this early stage.
And Drew, you came in straight from a baseball game. First off, did you guys take the dub? And also, how are you doing tonight?
Yeah, we actually were running a little behind. I walked in like right before we went live, and we went live late, but we were running behind because we were busy hanging double digits on the team we were playing. So it was a good night, So it was the first game of the season, so got to start the game off with the win. Go Warriors. But yeah, it was a good start to the night, man.
And Nate, how are you, man?
I'm good. Who did the Warriors play tonight?
They played the Crushers that did not crush.
The
Suck
Crushers.
Crushers.
The Crushers were crushed.
Yeah, any of you kids listening, you suck. Get out there.
I'm sure they all.
Your hopes are shattered.
Yeah, quit listening to this and get back out and play catch.
Do better.
Yeah, hit the cages.
Take some extra cuts, chumps.
Exactly.
Well, after Nate has decided he hates all the kids tonight, let's go ahead and get into some quick news and notes. Boys, I woke up this morning around 6 a.m., and the first piece of news that I get on my day is something that we've kind of been expecting to happen all offseason. George Pickens is now a Dallas Cowboy. So, Drew, I'm going to go ahead and ask you, and I'm going to go ahead and lead off with you. Who is the biggest winner out of this? Is it CeeDee Lamb? Is it Dak Prescott? Or is it George Pickens?
I do think Pickens sees a slight bump because it's a quarterback upgrade clearly over, whoever they have there. But I think the biggest winner is definitely Dak for me. I was kind of disappointed that he didn't get much of any help with the NFL draft, but we're only a couple years removed from whenever he was the quarterback 5 in points per game in 2023, and he was in the talk for the MVP. And his behind CD, his second leading receivers in receiving yards per game were Jake Ferguson and Brandon Cooks that year. So I mean, George Pickens and Jake Ferguson is an upgrade from that at this point. So whenever you start to talk about like the backing QB1s, guys like that, for me, I like to try to bank on guys that I think have the potential to bounce back from a touchdown rate perspective. And I think that Dak's in a position to do that, considering they still don't really have much of a run game either. So Dak has really turned into one of my favorite late round quarterbacks if I'm waiting on quarterback in redraft leagues.
And I'm so glad you brought up the perfect segue because I was going to ask Nate this exact question. Nate, Dallas gets George Pickens. CeeDee Lamb is still in the fold. Jake Ferguson is still in the fold. Is this Dallas run game dead on arrival before the season even starts?
I mean, dead on arrival based on what they have. Yeah, but we have to remember this mentality coming in is I could very easily see them try to, or at least maybe they want to be able to establish running lanes because this should be a heavier run offense given the coaching changes. But I just personally, I mean, where Javonte Williams is going, I could see myself taking a stab here and there, but ultimately, I think it's kind of a garbage heap, and which pile of crap will smell the best of the worst, I guess.
And if you're keeping track, I'm just saying, if you're not tracking that Jaden Blue ADP right now in Dynasty leagues and rookie drafts, that might be the ticket to go with right now because you have a guy who runs a high 4.3, has a little over 200 college touches on his leg. Coming off of a 4D reception season. It's an interesting profile. So if there's a guy that you might want to watch later on, once we get into camps and everything, and we see, hey, maybe Jaden Blue's trending in the right direction, could be an interesting flyer in redraft. But guys, we're not here to talk running backs tonight. We're here to talk quarterbacks here for the 2025 season. And as we put our consensus top 12 on the board, boys, if there is going to be anything going on, there are going to be some talking points. As we wait for that to come up on the screen right now, and here we go. Yeah, we see our top 12s. We see that our top 12, Lamar Jackson being QB1, Josh Allen QB2, Jaden Daniels 3, Jalen Hurts 4, Joe Burrow 5, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Patrick Mahomes, Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, Justin Herbert, and Justin Fields rounding out that top 12. And then we have each of our individual rankings right there. And we're just going to go ahead and let's just go ahead and start off around the frames. And let's just go ahead and ask the questions. And I'm going to start with you, Aiden. Then we'll go down to Nate, Drew, and then how I evaluated for these rankings. Aiden, you came into this exercise. How did you evaluate these quarterbacks? What were things you were looking for?
At this early stage, I think I look for projection and upside more than anything, if that makes sense. Like I look for, good ecosystems, if you will, good environments. So I think my main point is it's early stage. Maybe there's some more nuance as we get closer to the draft towards the summer. But right now, I just look at projection and like, if this guy can hit his ceiling, where will he finish? So if that makes sense, that's just how I look at it.
No, that's perfect. Nate?
Yeah, it is. It's a combination of that. I'm still an old head that likes to look at previous production as well, because if you've done it once, the likelihood that you can reproduce that, it does, lend some credence to overall rankings. As you said, the ecosystem. Of course, I do look at team dynamics, coaching changes, et cetera, what we have anticipated, and you mentioned projections. And however we each do our own projections is probably going to lend itself to how we look at overall rankings. And a lot of that is 5,000 different pieces of data, but there's, there's a little bit of gut to it as well. And what percentage of gut you want to use? I got more than you guys, so I guess I got to use more.
Drew, what about you, man?
I mean, at the top, I'm looking for guys that I have faith in and passers, but that I know are going to give me something with their legs as well. Especially if it's a 4-point per passing touchdown league, I need to have a mix of both. From there, I'm looking at touchdowns are tough to project, but I'm looking at trying to look at which guys I think have the best chance to be high touchdown guys, high yardage guys to fit in the kind of like that mid QB1 range. Whenever you're talking about guys like Burrow, Baker, Mahomes, that type of guys. And then from there, it's a mix of guys that I think could see an uptick in touchdowns or in offensive production and guys that still have some mobility, but I don't trust them as much as passers as I do the guys that are in the top tier. And so I think the back end QB ones are always tough to rank every year. And I haven't done like a study to see if there's any correlation to this or anything, but something that I like to look for whenever I'm toward the back end QB1s is I want passers that I have faith in, that I think they are good NFL quarterbacks, and offenses that have decent to good weapons, and then hopefully a bad defense on the other side to where they can find themselves in shootouts in a consistent basis, and they have the talent to go out there and be a part of the shootout. And so, that's just ways where you can kind of see an uptick in offense from one year to the other if a team has a bad defense and they're constantly putting their offense back on the field. So that's something that I focus in on a little bit whenever I start to get to the back end QB1s.
Yeah, and I love all of that, but and I'm just going to go ahead and talk, because if we look at my rankings right here tonight, they're interesting. And there's a reason for that, because whenever we saw the show schedule and it's like way too early quarterback rankings, I took it upon myself to kind of look at this strictly from a data perspective. So before we look at these rankings and say Rhett must be the biggest idiot on God's green earth, there are a couple things that I think we can take out of this tonight. First off, whenever I see something, and we're going to discuss it, such as Josh Allen being at QB4, I think the exercise I went on and the metrics I used, there were 7 different metrics I used. First off, I just went with a raw gut ranking for myself. Then I went with rushing yards per game from last year, fantasy points per game from last year, completion percentage above expected, or CPOE, whatever you want to call it, adjusted completion percentage, big time throw percentage, and then the on-target throw percentage. And then I went from there. I boiled those down to like decimal points. Then I had a value sum, and then I divided it by the number of metrics I had, and I came up with a value, what I called a value quotient, which was basically a divided number that kind of ranked all these guys. Long story short, I went real deep in these nerd weeds for these rankings. But what I saw and what I think I'm going to see is that rather than giving you hard and fast, this is my quarterback such and such, I think for extreme outliers like you're going to see in some of these cases tonight, I think what the exercise showed me was that you're going to have a possibility of some of these guys, some of that fluctuation, some of that variance, where if Josh Allen doesn't have the year that's expected, maybe he can end up as a quarterback 4 as opposed to the QB1 where he's a consensus and things like that. So I think us having a wide variety of perspectives is going to make for good discussion tonight. So let's just go ahead and get into that discussion. So Drew, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. No surprise at the top of our consensus rankings, we have Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen as our top 2 quarterbacks. What I want to ask you is, do you think there is anyone else that you think can be considered to be a real threat to be the quarterback 1 overall by the end of the season?
I do. I've got Jaden Daniels and Jalen Hurts in my top tier with Allen and Lamar as well. So if you want to take any one of those 4 guys as the first quarterback off the board, you're not going to hear much of anything from me. I think Jaden Daniels, he still has some room to grow as a passer. I think he was in the teens in terms of passing yards per game, and we know how productive he was as a passer and as a runner as well. And I don't think that part's going anywhere, and they've upgraded their weapons. So I could see him taking that next step and being the QB1. And then Jalen Hurts, I mean, at this point, as long as the tush pushes around, it seems like he's as good of a bet as anybody for double-digit rushing touchdowns. I don't think he's the level of passer that Daniels and Allen and Lamar are, but there's enough rushing there and their weapons are strong, and he's a good enough passer to go along with all the rushing upside that I think he could easily be the QB1 as well. So I've got those 4 guys in a tier together, and you're not going to hear any argument from me if you want to take one of them as the first quarterback off the board.
Yeah, but Drew, looking at everything I had, you mentioned that Jalen Hurts possibly not being a good passer of these other 3. But what I looked at in this data, especially in CPOE, completion percentage over expected.
Yep.
Last season, Jalen Hurts, in these 15 quarterbacks that I have ranked for the 1 through 15, Jalen Hurts was at the top of this list of quarterbacks 1 through 15.
Second.
He was second over who? Behind who?
Burrow.
Okay. Maybe I had those mixed up, but regardless, he was first or second in that situation. Between that and
up at the top, like you said.
Between that and adjusted completion percentage, I think what we're going to see is, I think what we can say is that even if Jalen Hurts isn't as polished of a passer, I think the Eagles put him in a very good position to where they can hide some of those deficiencies, and he can still have some very accurate passing numbers. And I think that lends well to his overall fantasy value too. So,
Yeah, no, I agree completely. Saying that he, like, I don't look at saying that he's not on the level of passer as a Josh Allen or a Lamar as an insult. You know, those guys are just the top of the top. But Hurts is definitely more than good enough. And to your point, he's in a great system with great weapons. So yeah, that's exactly why I think he has a fair argument to be the QB1 overall.
And so, yeah, I'm just sitting here also looking at our rankings of the top 4. We all pretty much agree, outside of Nate having Jalen Hurts as QB5 because he has Burrow a little bit higher. We'll go into that with our next question. But, Drew, I believe you were supposed to ask me at this point why Josh Allen at this point was sitting here at QB4 in my rankings. I mean, after all, he is the league MVP. He has this high rushing floor every year. So I think the question that begs asking is, how does Josh Allen end up being quarterback 4? And to be fair, like I said, we went strictly data off of this. So when I think things get adjusted, I think I still will have Lamar Jackson as my quarterback 1. But I think with some fine-tuning and some rearrangement, you probably see Josh Allen as my quarterback 2. But strictly looking at the data compared to these other guys, there are some things that I noticed is that in terms of things like rushing yards per game, where there's all this talk about the Konami code quarterbacks. And Josh Allen, just like Jalen Hurts, is a threat around the red zone, the goal line, no matter what, to get these rushing touchdowns. But last season, Josh Allen averaged about 11 rushing yards less per game than Jalen Hurts. Between that and the fact that Jalen Hurts had a better expected completion percentage, a better adjusted completion percentage, and a better on-target percentage compared to Josh Allen, the only places that Josh Allen really outperformed Jalen Hurts last year, and it probably makes a difference in these 6 metrics that I use, was in fantasy points per game, where it was 24.9 versus 24.6. And then the big-time throw percentage, where Josh Allen was worlds better. So for me, I think the big difference as to why I think Josh Allen has that floor where he could end up possibly in a rare scenario being a quarterback 4 or quarterback 5 is the fact that at times, compared to some of these other guys and the way he's used, and maybe he goes down the field a little bit more, maybe there are some usage issues there compared to these other guys, but his numbers his accuracy numbers don't play out as efficiently as some of these other quarterbacks. So I think that's where that discrepancy came from for Allen.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it's tough to doubt somebody that's been as consistent as he's been the last several years, and I am a little bit worried with Lamar. Just the spike that he had in his passing touchdowns last year. It's hard to expect that to continue. Which Lamar is as good as any quarterback in the league, so it very well could. But I don't know, man. He's done it year in and year out with weapons that don't really jump off the page, and it's just I think he's just going to be one of those guys that until I see the drop off happen, I'm not going to be able to try to be the one to project it.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned Lamar and this touchdown upswing last year. You got to keep in mind though that it's not the first time that he's had a spike here on touchdowns. Keep in mind that first MVP
the last
season,
time he won the MVP. Yeah.
Yeah, I think his MVP, his touchdown rate on that first MVP season was somewhere near like 10%, which is absolutely insane and not sustainable.
Incredible.
But it's, it just goes to show that you're like, oh, can Lamar do this again? He's done it in at least 3 seasons now. So, I mean, it's hard to doubt that as well.
Yeah, that's why you draft Lamar, because any given year, he is capable of giving you that. It's not something that you've been able to bet on every single year across the board, but more often than not, that's what he's given you. So you're not going to hear any argument at all if you want to take him as the first quarterback off the board, because he very well could do it all over again next year.
Yeah, so let's go in and let's move into let's ask Nate a question, because Nate, I'm going through our rankings, and the one thing I notice is that more than most of us, Nate Markham, you have a type. Oh. And I think your type is strong pocket quarterbacks. Looking at your rankings, you have Joe Burrow higher than all of us. You have him at quarterback 4, where others of us have him, if we're looking at it right now, quarterback 7, quarterback 6, quarterback 5. So you're higher on Joe Burrow versus the rest of us. What do you see? What makes you excited? Why do you have him as a top 4 quarterback here in 2025 this early?
When you asked as far as how I evaluate quarterbacks as far as rankings goes, and a lot of that with previous history for Joe Burrow especially, team dynamic. We touched on defense as being so poor. It's a combination of a couple different things. Number one, yeah, of course, I think myself and many others love the Konami code quarterbacks. It's such an elevated baseline of a floor that it does help offset some, some rough games here and there. But Joe Burrow's only like bottleneck to finishing, as far as I'm concerned, as a top 4 or 5 quarterback is health. And he's done each year that he's been healthy. He's played 16 games, or 16 or 17, I guess, when you have 17-game seasons. But he's finished like last year, first in yards, first in attempts. Zach Taylor-led offense, really nice and conducive for that. First in touchdown, fourth in touchdown percentage. And that's another area right there. Touchdown percentage being a quote-unquote unsticky stat. In the 3 years that he's been healthy, he's been fourth, and third. Or he's had, overall. So consistent touchdown upside. The pass attempts in a pass-heavy offense, the defense being so poor. I mean, last year they were 12th in most yards allowed, 4th most passing touchdowns allowed, the 3rd most first downs allowed. So constantly on their heels, which would put Joe Burrow in a dogfight in the majority of those. And the quick question, or the answer question that many want to say is, yeah, but without the rushing upside, you're banking everything on his arm. Here's a little statistic that I found rather interesting is if you look over the last 5 years and you look at the top 12 fantasy quarterback finishes, with how many of those top 12 finished with less than 300 yards rushing. And I use 300 as a baseline for this. One, because it fits my narrative a little bit more, but more importantly is because Joe Burrow twice has had around 250-ish yards rushing. Not crazy to think that he won't get above 300. Last year, 3 of the top 12 finished within the top 3 of the top with less than 300 yards rushing. In 23, 8 of 12 had less than 300 yards rushing. In 22, 5 of 12. 21, 7 of the 12. And in 2020, 6 of the 12. Easy jumping off point is to say, yeah, but on a per game basis, how many of those did that? And that number does dwindle a little bit, just because you look at some of the true like later rookie quarterbacks that got a chance later in the season and they came up and they did have a better points per game. But if I'm looking for a guy, and then the reason why I have him ahead of Hurts is, to be fair, I think that the passing game versus the running option here in Philly will take away a little bit of Hurts' upside. But Burrow's about as, with health, I think he's the most he's the easiest pick for me to have in my top 5 as the pocket quarterback.
And dude, you make excellent points. The thing is, I'm looking at a Joe Burrow, and I want to bounce it to Aiden right here. Aiden, there's been a lot made about the lack of investment that the Bengals made in defense this offseason. They addressed it in the draft a little bit, but by and large, this is a team that seems like they might have a few issues defensively heading into 2025. So you have Joe Burrow up around you have him as quarterback 5 in these early rankings. Mm-hmm. Assuming that the Bengals are who we think they're going to be, and they're in a lot of shootouts. The defense isn't playing well. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins or Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Joe Burrow is healthy. What's the ceiling for Joe Burrow, in your opinion, in 2025?
If the defense stays as bad as it is and we're painting a shootout scenario, I don't – like, this might sound like a weird answer, but I don't think there is a ceiling if we really look at it, because, like, there's literally no cap at how many points. Like, Joe Burrow has all the weapons. He has the bad defense. It'll be positive grade scripts to the point, well, he will have to throw the ball a ton. I just think it's like this offense to the moon and beyond, because I don't see, like, if Joe Burrow's playing catch up a lot because of the defense, then I don't see how there's a cap on his numbers personally.
So that's, I think we can all agree that in the top 5 quarterbacks, I think there's no real hard disagreement on this top 5 being pretty solid, straightforward, no questions asked. That being said, looking through the rest of these rankings, I couldn't help but to notice going through things today that each of us ended up with something of a spicy quarterback take. So I'm going to go ahead and come back to you, Aiden, right away. He's not listed, but you had Matthew Stafford as your quarterback 8 in our rankings. Go ahead and talk us through why you have Matthew Stafford that high. He's getting a little longer in the tooth, but he can still sling it. He's got some weapon upgrades. We know the rushing floor isn't there. So what is it with Matthew Stafford?
Yeah, he's not going to give you anything as like literally nothing as a rusher, unfortunately. But I told you guys a couple weeks ago that if they get a legit tight end prospect like Terrence Ferguson, then I would rank him as a back end top 12 QB1. And here we are. They swap out Cooper Kupp for Devontae Adams, which I don't know about you, but in my opinion, is an upgrade just based on where Cooper Kupp is at this point in his career. Adams, the route runner he still is. And then we absolutely know with Puka adding Ferguson, he has a good run game to support him. And I think like typically when they get into the red zone, this is a high-powered, fast-paced offense. But the most thing I go back to is Sean McVay. This is an established ecosystem, an established system. So projecting forward, I just don't know how Matthew Stafford fails. Like there's a lot of opportunity here between the weapons. It's a good defense, but it's a young defense, so maybe they'll have to play catch up a lot. So in my opinion, I'm a bit too high, maybe a lot bit too high on Matthew Stafford. But that's why these early rankings are fun to get some spicy bold takes, if you will. So I got Matthew Stafford as QB8. I am extremely bullish on him for this early ranking period.
So, Drew, you must be behind these comments right now because I just saw this Go Rams Super Bowl champion comment get dropped. So, what are your thoughts on Aiden's ranking of Matt Stafford as quarterback 8? Where do you currently have him, and how do you see that situation as a Rams fan heading into the season?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, absolutely bring Jalen Ramsey home like they're talking about, and we're the Rams are going back for another Super Bowl run. But I don't mind this ranking at all, man. I mentioned earlier that the back end of the QB1s, it's all betting on guys that you think could have a spike in touchdowns or a spike in production. And like Aiden said, upgrading the pass catchers between bringing in Devontae Adams and drafting Ferguson, that's an upgrade over what they had last year. And a lot of the touchdowns went to Kyron Williams last year, and he's great in the red zone. That could very well happen again this year. But Matthew Stafford also could have things bump his way. Devontae Adams is really good in the red zone. Like I think that him and Devontae are going to have a really good connection in that area. Whenever Kupp was at his best, him and Kupp thrived in that area as well. I could see them easily developing that kind of connection once they get into the red zone. And then all of a sudden, Stafford has a spike in touchdowns. He's back up in that 40 range like he was the first year that he was with the Rams. And I think he was the quarterback 5 that year. So it's like, I technically have him down at quarterback 19 right now, but literally my QB 10 to my quarterback 20 is one big tier of like I could see any of these guys finishing as a top 12 quarterback. So I got Stafford. He's in like he might be toward the bottom of that ranking for me just because of how they've used Kyron Williams in the run game in the red zone the last few years. But I could easily see him having that spike, and it wouldn't shock me a bit. He's in that same range to where my quarterback 10 is. So it's a really big range of guys that it's the reason why I think that late round quarterback is such a strong strategy again this year, like it has been pretty much every year in the past. There's just so many quarterbacks toward that back end that could very well end up giving you QB1 production. And I think Stafford is absolutely one of those guys.
But I'm not crazy for. So what I'm hearing is I'm not extremely crazy for having this QB8.
No, I mean he's already finished higher than that with the Rams just a few years ago. So it's not like you can say we haven't seen it before. So no, I don't think you are at all.
Okay.
And so moving into what we're now going to call former Rams quarterbacks who are sitting in the same sort of situation as a Matt Stafford, a lot of weapons, limited rushing upside, and Nate. You took Jared Goff as your quarterback 9 for the 2025 season. State the case because once again, it's a very similar situation to Matt Stafford, limiting if any rushing upside. Yet he just goes out. He's the guy that works in that system. He's been productive for about 3 or 4 years now at a very high level. So what do you see on a fantasy level that has you have ranking Jared Goff as QB9?
Well, I anticipated that Susie would be in the chat, and so mostly it's just to be spiteful towards her and say how much the Rams suck. And Jared Goff, once leaving Los Angeles, has obviously found his stride. That is not entirely what it was, because I don't base all of my rankings around spiting Susie. While 80% of them are, there's still 20% of me that says Jared Goff is in a situation that just breeds success. Very similar. I don't trust that the Lions, while getting healthier, have still completely positively, regressed or whatever back to a good defense. So check mark number one. If you look at, let's get the, address the elephant in the room. Sure, no Ben Johnson. And that's going to go into a lot of the Caleb Williams talk that I'm sure we're going to have. Is the addition of Ben Johnson in Chicago is going to do more for Caleb Williams than the loss will hurt Jared Goff. And I think that's my belief at this. Each year, he's become more acclimated with Detroit. Each year he's been with Detroit, he's improved his yardage, his touchdown. The protection should be there. The offensive line is as good as they come. And he has the weapons around. I do know that, well, yes, the Chiefs do suck. It is,
Yes, they do.
They do. I know. It's fine. It's not a big deal. But the rushing upside is gone. We know that. There is no rushing upside. There's no rushing downside either. So what he's done without the ability to run has proven year over year that he can finish as a top 10 quarterback 6, 7, and 10 in the consecutive 3 years. He's safe, boring. One of the other questions I'm sure someone's going to have, what about the indoor-outdoor splits? I know that's going to take a little bit of a,
It's like you can read my mind.
And I can read everybody's mind because those are all the things that I went into when I had him, and I was like, all right, yeah, I got to drop him down to 13. And I could very easily. Unfortunately, Drew, where yours is QB 13 to 20, I could see QB 9 through 20 all moving 5 to 6 spots with every time someone brings up a very valid point about indoor outdoor. Ben Johnson, lack of rushing upside, all those are going against it, but I do trust him in that system, and I do trust the weapons around him. And it may be boring, but sometimes boring is conducive to victory.
Yeah, I was going to play devil's advocate because I am lower on him, and that was one of the things that I was going to bring up was that last year one of the big talking points of why people were buying into Jared Goff is how much better he is in an indoor stadium, and he had this nuts rollout where it just so happened that like all of his road games but one of them were playing on teams that were in a dome, and people were excited about that. And and those splits are a really very real thing. Like that's just not just some like off the wall narrative. Like those splits are there. And man, whenever you look at the Lions road games this year, it really is wild just how much different it is. Like they have to go, like obviously the in division games, they have to go to Chicago and Green Bay and Minnesota like they always do. All three are going to be tough teams. They have to go to Washington, to Philadelphia, to Baltimore, to Kansas City. Like those are really difficult road games and outdoor stadiums to where I could see them being lower scoring games. And another point in that fashion is that something like I mentioned earlier that I look at teams that I'm hoping can get into a lot of shootouts. I think this Lions defense is going to be really improved with the additions they've made along with the guys that they just needed to be healthy last year. I think they're going to have an improved defense. And if we believe Ben Johnson is as special of a play caller as he is, I do think you have to at least ding the offense a little bit for losing him. Maybe the replacement they have ends up turning out just fine, but if he's this guy we've built him up to be, I feel like that has to matter. And so I do think that there's a lot of things. And then Goff had a 6.9% touchdown percentage last year, and that's the only time over his career that he's went over 6. And so he had the nuts roll out. He made the most of it. I think last year we saw the ceiling for Goff. But you don't have him ranked to where even where he finished last year. So I don't think your ranking's crazy. I just think that there's other guys toward that back in QB1 that I like a little bit more. So that's why I think I'm the lowest of all of us on him. So I feel like I needed to give the other side of the coin, but I get it. He's still in that same humongous tier I talked about that I could easily see finishing anywhere in that back in QB1 range. So I don't blame you. And to be fair to you, you're more in, like, if you look at the Fantasy Pros expert consensus rankings, he's QB 10. So you're more in line with what the consensus is right now than we are. So to be fair to you, but I am a little bit concerned personally.
And that's going to go ahead and jump back because we talk about pocket quarterbacks with upside. Friend of the show, multiple time guest Colby Conway says, when does the CJ Stroud QB1 talk begin? Colby, I went through the numbers
Well.
from last year, and from my perspective, it wasn't pretty. And my questions I have around CJ Stroud is: do I think there's QB1 conversation and him getting back to being a top 12 quarterback this year? I think every one of us on this show would agree that that is absolutely a possibility. My questions come around this. There's going to be a lot of change in that offensive line. There's going to be a lot of change in that wide receiver room. We know who Nico Collins is. We don't know who Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel are at the NFL level yet. So it's hard for me to project what CJ Stroud looks like with what is going to be mostly a new offensive line and mostly a new wide receiver room here in 2025. So, I mean, as much as I love CJ Stroud, the person and the player, he's just kind of a hard project right now in my eyes.
I have him at 12, Colby, just so you know. I'm the only person with him inside the top 12. So despite the fact that
right there.
Your wife is my mortal enemy, you and I still remain friends.
Just so you know.
So moving into guys that were right on the fringe of that QB1 conversation for us tonight. Drew Scott, there was only one of us who had the gumption, the wherewithal, the foresight to rank Justin Herbert inside of their top 10. And that, my man, was you. We all have him as QB 13. You have him sitting at QB 10. I looked at the numbers from last year. They weren't especially impressive. There's this Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman offense that doesn't necessarily lend itself well to elite quarterback play. So what's the case on Justin Herbert?
Well, the number one thing is that I just still believe that he is a really, really great quarterback.
And I agree, by the way.
I think that the numbers were pretty impressive because whenever you look at it, he was 6th in completion percentage over expected. He was 11th in yards per attempt. And that's before you consider the fact that they just added Trey Harris to this offense. So I think there's even room to grow from being 11th in that fashion. And then he's one of only 2 quarterbacks, along with Lamar Jackson himself, with 65 plus pass touchdowns and 20 interceptions or less over the past 3 seasons. And then whenever you look at it last year, whenever the offense went to, I know early on in the year they were a little bit more run heavy and Herbert was floating in like that 20-ish attempt range. But whenever the pass attempts started getting into the 30s more consistently, you look at it from starting at week 8, whenever you look at fantasy points per game, he was 7th among quarterbacks. I think, don't get me wrong, Omarion Hampton clearly investing a first round pick in him. I think that they still are going to run the ball. But I think that Herbert is going to pass plenty. I think it'll be close to what we saw toward the end of last year, and the weapons have improved since last year. He's still a great quarterback. He's going to give you something with his legs as well. And the great thing is I think the Chargers defense is trending in the wrong direction. And I think that I think the Chargers could find themselves in shootouts kind of often. And as much as you might want to run the ball whenever you get down, if you need to pass the ball, you're going to be tempted to do that, especially whenever your quarterback is Justin Herbert. So I think he's just whenever you factor in the skill of him as a quarterback, the weapons that he has at his disposal, and then how frequently they could find themselves needing to put up points, I think he's just a great guy to bet on.
Yeah, I did notice that after the bye in week 5, it was week 6 on when we did see that uptick in the passing attempts. I have my reservations a little bit about Herbert, but not much. Like I honestly really do think that the system, while it's chicken and egg or chicken or egg, what was the reason for the more pass heavy attack? Was it because they didn't have a running back that they rely on and trust? Or was it the fact that after the bye, they realized we have Justin Herbert at quarterback and we should actually put the ball in his hands more? And that's not even close to what, like if you go back to 2022 when he was, there were weeks where he was at 50 attempts plus. Is there a potential chance for him to get back into the 40s on maybe not on a per game basis, but even more so? I think that maybe the floor is where we saw last year and the ceiling could be some blend of 2022, because he had 0 games last year where he had 40 plus attempts. And, and I know that what our expectations were for Herbert when he saw 35 plus, we saw it as a revelation. We were thrilled as fantasy managers because we finally got to see what they were doing. And in 2022, he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 games with 40 attempts or more. So maybe we'll get back to 2022 S, but I think the coaching staff will probably still limit a little bit, and that defense is going to be atrocious, like you said. I really don't trust them. I think we'll see more shootouts.
Yeah, I think that's a point in Herbert's favor, and I completely agree with you. If you told me that he was going to hit 40 plus pass attempts for 8, 9, 10 games of the season, he would be in that Burrow, Baker, Mahomes area for me. I think that like the 30, 35 attempts, I think that's enough to give him, that back end QB1 upside. But if he was able to reach those passing attempts, I'd have him even higher in my rankings just because of how good I think he is as a quarterback and how productive he would be on a per attempt basis. That I would love that. So that would be great if it turned out that way.
I mean, fair enough.
All right, so enough Justin Herbert. All right. Rhett, we all had our guy that was in the top 10 that nobody else really had in the top 10 or the top 12 at least. Your guy that or maybe not your guy. Maybe it was just your spreadsheets guy. I don't know. You'll have to let me know.
Spreadsheet guy, yeah.
You have to let me know. But
The
spreadsheet ended up saying that Brock Purdy should be a top 12 fantasy quarterback. So what do you agree with out of your spreadsheet where you could see Purdy giving you this top 12 season?
Okay, there are a couple things with Brock Purdy that number one with the spreadsheet / just looking at other metrics, you really see a guy who I'm going to concede this right off the bat. Looking at this spreadsheet, most of the time you color code these green good, yellow mid, orange not great, red bad, correct? That's pretty much how these things go.
Yep, that's how it works.
Brock Purdy somehow is entirely yellows, oranges, and reds, and still ends up around QB 10 in this spreadsheet. My thing with him is this. For the most part, we only ranked 15 guys in this thing. Last year he comes out, 4.4% touchdown rate, 8.5 yards per attempt was third in the league, 0.57 fantasy points per dropback was eighth in the league, 18.6 fantasy points was 10th. In a lot of ways, he measured out as a quarterback one. Now, where this needs adjusting, and I think this is absolutely, once again, with an outlier, a ceiling situation, because if Brock Purdy ends up as quarterback 10 with a really good season, I don't think anybody's surprised. What ends up hurting the Brock Purdy case, and I'm just going to go ahead and be fully disclosed right here. Last year, Brock Purdy with a clean pocket was 30th in the league with a 65.6% completion percentage, but yet was somehow better under pressure with a 67% completion percentage whenever he was under pressure. He was third in the league last year. So I'm going to be honest with you. Brock Purdy ends up 10th on this spreadsheet. This is a guy that in all likelihood, once we dig further into it, probably takes a bump down once we take some actual human element into this. Because when I looked at the human element of it by itself, in my raw ranking, I believe I had Brock Purdy as quarterback. He was barely number 12 in that situation. So while I still had him as a top 12, 13, 14, and 15 happened to be in my raw rankings, which are strictly off my gut, Dak Prescott, Caleb Williams, and CJ Stroud. So to say that Brock Purdy is some standout QB1 slam dunk candidate in 2025, I don't see it. But the numbers suggest, looking at it in the 15 guys that I ranked, that he was just pretty steady across the board with those shades of yellow, whether it was him averaging 21.5 rushing yards per game, whether it was him in this website I use, 22.4 fantasy points per game, whether it was the CPOE, the adjusted completion percentage, a low big time throw rate, which I don't think that is ever going to be Brock Purdy's game, but he did have a 78.4 on target percentage with his throws. So there's some accuracy things with Brock Purdy that I think say, okay, he's good in spots, but in terms of being a slam dunk, no, I completely agree that quarterback 10 is probably the absolute ceiling for him this coming season.
Yeah, I mean, he's in a good system. He's got good weapons, and I know they tried to improve the defense this year between the draft and free agency, but there's also a chance the defense might not be great. And so He might be throwing the ball a decent amount as well, and he's got good weapons. And to your point, in structure in the system, he's been productive. So he's like a lot of these guys we've talked about. He's in that range for me. I've got him QB 15. So I mean, he's not that far outside of my top 12, and he's in that tier of quarterback that it's not going to shock me at all if he ends up a QB1. So even though it might be a little high for me, I can't really argue too much.
Yeah. And so I think that's the point we're kind of getting at tonight, is that outside of what do we have here? Outside of these
draft your quarterback. If you're in a one quarterback league, wait to draft your quarterback.
Always.
Late round
outside of these,
always the way.
Yeah, these top 6. I think we can all agree that with Jackson, Allen, Daniels, Hurts, Burrow, and Baker, those are your clear top 6, and everything else is kind of muddled, guys. I mean, I think that's kind of
I think I would stop at 5. I think that if put on the spot, if it was Baker or Kyler or Patty there, I think at that point that's when I would not even make that pick. I would pivot to a different position. I feel like that tier break is right there, significant enough that while I don't think any of them give me that can be the QB1 overall vibe, I think they all are fine by waiting. But
just pound skill positions early and then wait on QB till later.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Honestly.
But yeah, that also brings into the idea. We mentioned Jaden Daniels. We mentioned Bo Nix. We see Caleb Williams on this list. We have 3 second-year quarterbacks inside of the top 12. So I'm going to go with each of you guys now and just ask you why you're highest on the guy that you're highest on. So, Aiden, you are bullish, to say the least, on Caleb Williams. Quarterback 7. I'm going to go ahead and say it. You've got balls for it, so tell me why Caleb Williams in May is your quarterback 7 for 2025.
I love how we set up for this year, guys. 1, he got his coach in Ben Johnson, upgraded the offensive line significantly. On top of all the weapons he already had with DJ Moore and Robert Dunze, Cole Kmet, they add the first 2 picks are high-level skill position players in Colston Loveland and Luther Burden. And I don't really think of much DeAndre Swift. As a receiving back, he's fine, good enough, whatever. But as a pure runner, like, okay, not really that much like to be attracted about. But what I go back to is Ben Johnson, the proven system at the Lions. I really, really like this fit. And all the positions, if you really think about this, it's just crazy to think about. But there's every single personnel package the Chicago Bears can run out there with Caleb Williams, they have a plus starter at every single level of the field. There's literally no void and holes in this roster, on offense at least, whatsoever, offensive line included. I absolutely love how he's set up, and it starts with coaching, in my opinion. And second, you were talking about second-year quarterbacks. Second-year players in general are fantasy gold mines, in my opinion, and you should heavily invest in them. Yeah. That's a side tangent, but like second-year breakouts happen all the time, and I'm absolutely expecting it from Caleb.
I don't think it's crazy at all, to be honest.
It's very high, but like when you really think about it, it should be like more consensus, I feel like.
Yeah, and right before we get to mine, I want to piggyback off of Caleb, because if I had to ask you guys, every quarterback in the league last year that had 50 or more rushing attempts, how many of those quarterbacks had 0 rushing touchdowns?
Caleb Williams.
I know that Caleb Williams is one of them. I don't know if there were any others, but I was literally just looking at it.
I think that's just him.
CJ Stroud. He had 52 rush attempts and 0. I should have catch
Stroud had enough attempts.
Yeah, I think Caleb has way more rushing upside than CJ Stroud.
Oh, no doubt. I'm using that as since there were 20, there were 19 quarterbacks that had 50 plus rush attempts, and of the roughly, we'll say 20, only 2 had no rushing touchdowns. If your floor is just the passing and the rushing yardage upside, and you then add in, I mean, the average amongst those quarterbacks that had 60 plus attempts is, I'm going to kind of take Hurts and Josh Allen, not as outliers, but kind of as outliers. Special. Let's say 4, let's say 4 touchdowns right there. It does. I'm shocked that 10. I don't know. I really want to put Caleb higher than 10, and I feel like that's going to be
I know.
the one that I'll probably have more shares of Caleb Williams than
So
many
it
of the
sounds like
other.
you guys liked it on this aggressive on it.
I love it. I wanted to.
Yeah,
I
too.
sincerely had it, and I went back and forth, and just was cautiously optimistic that new system might take one more year. But if I could invest in him, that's who I would. And Rhett, you were going to ask me about the opposite of mine. Like, why am I the lowest on?
Yeah,
Bo Nix?
you and Aiden are both have Bo Nix at quarterback 11. We already spoke to Aiden about Caleb Williams. So why are you as low as you are on Bo Nix, where me and Drew have him just inside that top 10?
Yeah, I really am bullish on him. I like Bo Nix a lot. The areas that I looked at when I was a little concerned, one was if he had a manageable back issue all last year, forced him to miss, I guess, the Pro Bowl, which means nothing, but it is something that is worth addressing to know that he had an issue early on already that did require maintenance and management. And I do think the defense is going to be improved. I would like to think that maybe the rushing game is going to be more involved in Denver, but even if not, I guess my breaking point for not having them top 10 is it's a combination of the defense. I think the defense is going to be fine, like they always have been. I could see Harvey having more involvement. The weapons don't inspire greatness to me around him, even though he could do. It's crazy is how well he did with so little. No offense to Cortland Sutton and all, but let's call a spade a spade. And then just in general, when you have, I'm talking about a second-year guy. I have no clue how Sean Payton's going to utilize and manage his rushing upside, but a lot of his value as being, if I was going to put him in the top 10, would be predicated on him providing, 92 rush attempts, the fifth most in the NFL last year. I see that number coming down, but that still, he still should be right around that top 10. He's another intriguing player there. Let's say that you're waiting and you have that Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, even Justin Fields, Justin Herbert. That's one of those. I would probably like to have diversified funds, if you will, between all of those guys. I have no problem taking a share of each one, thinking that either one of those four or some of the other names could produce that top 6, top 5 upside.
I'm going to ask you a question as to whether I'm crazy for thinking Bo Nix is a regression candidate this year.
I saw that.
Yeah, I don't think it's crazy. I think that his performance, especially down the stretch, while is it sustainable? It's hard to say because we have, you only have 1 year worth of sample size. But if you look at the game logs as a whole, it really took that the touchdown percentage towards the last, like from week 10 on was crazy. I mean, we're talking about a 10% touchdown in like 5 of the games. So to expect a second-year quarterback with what I consider middle of the road option, offensive weapons around him, the likelihood for regression probably is heavier weighted than others.
Yeah, and I want to be fair to Nate too. Even though I am one of the higher ones on Bo Nix, I am also pretty concerned. And think he could be a regression candidate. I'm trying not to have take lock because I was not a Bo Nix guy. But he was 22nd in completion percentage over expected. He was 21st in adjusted completion percentage. He was 17th in catchable throw percentage, and he was 18th in passing yards per game. Again, I'm not trying to have take lock, but I don't know how good of an actual NFL quarterback he really is. And I don't really think the rushing is going to go away, but I think there's a lot of possibilities for guys that are just better NFL quarterbacks to have spike years and to have a better fantasy season than him. And so, maybe I'm wrong for that and I'm underselling Bo Nix, but I still have questions about how good of an actual NFL quarterback he is. And it was his rookie year. Obviously, there's the world where he just gets better, right? Like, we talk about buying into the year 2 guys. So that absolutely could happen. But I still have some questions. I mean, he was an older prospect, right? If I'm remembering that right, he wasn't necessarily a guy that was like a project that you were investing into. Like, he was supposed to be the ready to go guy because of how long he had been in college. And so, it's just like how much of a jump can we expect in that type of scenario. So I do have my concerns, and I won't be surprised if I end up moving him down as the off season goes along.
If there's a positive to put a little bit of, I guess, positivity in this situation, is that the areas of concern that you just addressed, which were completion percentage, et cetera, is that when you bring in Evan Ingram, that can help absorb a lot of flaws. And does it help the overall?
And RJ Harvey's a great pass catching back as well. And Bo Nix isn't afraid to dump it off either. And so he didn't have a dependable pass catcher that could actually make plays for him either. There were guys that could catch the ball and do nothing with it, but RJ Harvey can actually make plays with the ball in his hands as a dump off option too. So I do think there are some things working in his favor, and that's kind of why he is where he is, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous about it.
And so on the other side of that spectrum, Drew, I'm going to throw this to you. The third year 2 quarterback on our rankings is near the top. It's Jaden Daniels. Is there any shot at a Jaden Daniels regression this year? I mean, the obvious answer is yes, but if so, why do you think that there's that possibility?
Yeah, I mean, it could happen, but I'm not betting on it personally. I'm not going to give you the reason why I think it's going to happen, because I don't think it's going to happen. I think Jaden Daniels is legit. Even as a rookie, he was still 8th in adjusted completion percentage. He was 11th in completion percentage over expected. Like, I just think that the dude is a legitimately good quarterback as a passer. We know it from a fantasy standpoint, how valuable his rushing upside is. And then the offense has only gotten better this offseason. The weapons have only gotten better. And I would imagine year 2 in this system, he's only going to get better. That's what I'm banking on. I'm not banking on a regression by any means. If I'm gonna spend an early round pick on a quarterback, I think he's one of the most fun ones to make a bet on, because there is so much room for growth considering it was just his rookie season. So if you believe in Jaden Daniels, the player, the real NFL life quarterback, I don't think there's any reason not to bet on him this year.
I mean, it's a solid point around the case. So before we get out of here, guys, I'm going to go around the frames, and we're going to ask us 2 questions around the frames. We're going to start with Aiden and then just go down the board. Aiden, go ahead and give me who you think inside of our consensus top 12 has the best chance to outperform their ranking on this list right now as of May 7, 2025.
Like exceed expectations, you're talking?
Yes, exceed expectations.
I think, I mean, I had, or consensus, you mean, so that's a tough.
You want me to go while you think about it?
No, I got one out. Justin Fields made our consensus,
yeah,
right?
That's the answer.
Right?
Yeah.
No, I was just looking at it. So we had Justin Fields here towards the bottom, but because of the rushing, every time he has been a real life NFL starter, like he has been not just a fantasy star, like a fantasy superstar. So like this is the prime late round QB candidate, and if he smashes, you just got a lottery ticket, and he could exceed all expectations. That's just who I'm gonna go with, and it sounds like we're all on the same page. But
yeah, that was the answer that I was going to give while I gave you time to think about it. If you look at last year, weeks 1 through 6, last year he was the QB7, and then if you go back to 2022, whenever he was a starter, the good amount of the year, he was the QB5 in fantasy points per game. Like whenever the guy's a starter with the rushing upside he gives you, he's been a top 10 quarterback, and we've barely got him inside the top 12. And so the contract that the Jets gave him isn't like overwhelmingly crazy, but to me it looks like that they're not. And this could absolutely happen. I mean, the one thing about the NFL that is consistent is chaos is always happening. But the way that the contract's laid out, and the fact that Tyrod, who is one of my favorite backups in the league, but is the backup quarterback, if the Jets struggle, I don't think they're going to be as quick to turn away from Fields as the Steelers were last year whenever they started to struggle as a team a little bit. And so I think that you have a little bit more security that they're just kind of ride this Fields thing out this year. And I could be wrong about that, but that's how I see things. And if that's the case, forget what you think about him as a passer. I mean, he does, he has Garrett Wilson out there for him. The weapons are okay. They added Mason Taylor too. They improve the offensive line. And so, I think that he could easily end up being a top 6, 7, 8 quarterback if we get a full season out of him.
Nate?
Yeah, I want to think a different person. I'm not going to, because Justin Fields just a few weeks ago when we did our too early redraft rankings, The value spot I had was in Justin Fields, and you guys accentuated every point that I had made then and still hold true now. His dangerous, he's so dangerous around the goal line. Through 6 games, 5 rushing touchdowns last year. The impact and the lottery ticket, like Aiden said, for that is there. And I even mentioned at the time, sorry, Jordan Travis and all, but that was my concern, is that maybe he actually, took that next step forward, and then, well, lo and behold, that clearly didn't work out. But I'll do it 1B, and I'll say that Caleb Williams has everything in front of him as a QB9. I think he could slip into that top 5, and that's a pretty significant jump. I mean, if the touchdowns happen to come on the ground, if the weapons that he has, the key is going to be just how much does Ben Johnson let him. How does Ben Johnson create the offense around him? Is it a slow, meticulous approach to get the most out of him for his career, or is it here's the keys to the Ferrari, see what it's got, or Lamborghini, or whatever your car choice is? Don't really care.
Yeah, and so I'm sitting here and all these guys, and Justin Fields, love the answer. Caleb Williams, love the answer. There's something about, and we've been around this. I think Drew went down this road last year and was disappointed. Maybe I'm setting myself up for disappointment, but Kyler Murray, for some reason, we didn't see Marvin Harrison perform at his best last year. Maybe that was a Kyler Murray issue, but Marvin Harrison has a year in the league. He's added some weight. He's allegedly put in the work this offseason. Marvin Harrison should make a immense year 2 jump this year. And while Kyler Murray was admittedly not great in a lot of levels last year, he was still top 10 in clean pocket completion percentage at 70.9%. He was 13th in pressure completion percentage at 57.5%. He also had 14 drops, and he was top 10 in expected points added last year, and was 13th in true passer rating and 8th in QBR at 66.9. So yes, the Kyler Murray profile is always going to be flawed. Like, I get that. I understand it. Kyler Murray is probably secret butt. Like, let's just be honest. But what he is also going to be is he is always going to make plays. 572 rushing yards last year. He's a threat to give you 700 rushing yards on any given year in fantasy football, because that's just what his game is. He's a smaller guy that moves around. He's got weapons that are going to improve. Trey McBride is still there. Marvin Harrison, I believe, is a prime candidate to jump into wide receiver 1 territory this year and move into that 1,200 yard range with close to 10 touchdowns. So if you add in the fact that you get a significant jump from one of his most important weapons, it gives Kyler Murray more upside than we might be forecasting him for heading into 2025. So I like that answer as well.
Interesting. That made me feel a little bit better about Kyler. I've been kind of nervous of him this offseason, to be honest, but those stats made me feel a little bit better. I'll have to take a little bit of a deeper dive into it.
All right, but now let's go to the other side. Which quarterback do we think, and let's start with Drew first, who do we think has the best chance to disappoint amongst our top 12 this season?
I already talked about him a little bit, but I'll just say it again. I think Bo Nix is the one I'm probably most nervous about, and I think it's the hardest one to rank. Just the concerns I already mentioned about what I have with him as a passer, and then the fact that I think that RJ Harvey is leagues better than anybody they had in the running back room last year. And Sean Payton seems to really like him based on the fact that he drafted him around higher than anybody else thought that they were going to go, which I thought was great, because I loved RJ Harvey before the draft. So I thought that was awesome to see him get that draft capital. But the investment they made in the running game, along with my concerns with him as a passer, I am a little bit worried that he might drop out. And the Broncos defense seems like it's going to be tough too. They invested even more in it to upgrade the defense this offseason. And so I don't know how many shootouts we're going to see the Broncos in either. And so I'm worried about Bo Nix.
And Brandon wants to go ahead and ask us, he said, did Kyler's defense get enough pieces to help him get the ball back more often? That's a good question. Nate, you want to take that? You being the defensive guy and the IDP quote unquote expert in here tonight.
The one thing that every quote unquote expert will tell you is that when it comes to the Arizona Cardinals defense, what we think we know, we never do. It's been 3 years in a row where they've went towards specific pieces that it was the involvement of those pieces that no one really knew how it was going to work out. Well, I think this year was probably the best approach they've taken to beefing up the front in Calais Campbell and Josh Sweat, adding Will Johnson on the outside is nice. I still have my reservations at linebacker. I don't really trust. I mean, when I throw these names out and I say Akeem Davis Gaither and Mac Wilson, Owen Papoa and Cody Simon, BJ Ojolari, none of those names stand out to any one of really to anybody, maybe unless you're in IDP circles. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, turnover. He's asking if get the ball back more often. Sure, you're looking at more turnovers, and I guess the likelihood that they have a better pass rush could predicate more splash plays, more turnovers getting the ball. But I wouldn't bank Kyler's overall ranking on the defense specifically.
So in terms of Kyler Murray and all those things, seems like he's one of these guys that can boom or bust, depending on a couple circumstances. But who do you think has the best chance to bust among these quarterbacks that were in our top 12, Nate?
So can I say it's based off of one thing I don't know what's going to happen, but I think Jalen Hurts could be the one that I hate to say a bust because I like Jalen Hurts a lot. But if the tush push realistically does get banned, that is a significant drop for a person who's on a team that we know is going to be driven through the run. And I
that already got tabled for the year, right?
No, I thought they said in 2 weeks they were going to. Oh,
no, they said it's staying.
Oh, it is. Okay. So I had actually was looking that up earlier and I thought it said in the second week of May, but that was March. So, well, okay, fair enough. I don't want to drop them down that much then.
That's the only reason I wanted to bring it up because I thought I remembered that they said that it got tabled for at least for another year. Like, it could very well come back up again next year, but I think at least for this year, we're safe for the
exactly
being removed.
It is. I'm looking exactly at what I was, what I had referenced earlier. And I guess I don't know my months nearly as much, but outside of the consensus rankings, based on my own, the most likely to underperform is probably Patrick Mahomes. You know, I mean,
coming from the Chiefs fan.
Well, but the reality of the situation is that I think that if there's any person on this list that based off of U3's rankings at 12 and Drew, you have him at 7. So me and you are both right to the same thing. If Patrick Mahomes was the quarterback 1 on the season, I don't think there's a person. Aiden, you can raise your hand if you want, out of just hate. I get it, and I would respect you for that. But if he finishes the QB1 and reverted back to a 5,050 touchdown year, to be shocked maybe, because that's pretty substantial numbers that I don't think anybody would have expectations for. But can he do it? Or what I said earlier, like when we were breaking down what we use to look at quarterbacks, is once you've done it once, does that mean you can continuously do that and sustain it? Yes and no. We know what Mahomes brings to the table. The question is we don't know what the offense is going to be handed to him. And it's been these dink and dunk, little short to intermediate, which it does. It does zap the upside. If you look from like week 8 on till the end of the season last year, when he was by far the most productive he had been all year, with like a 20-3 touchdown interception ratio, he still was the QB 8 over that span. So that's kind of like, I think that's, I don't want to say a ceiling, but realistically,
no, it's not.
I worry it's not a ceiling, but I do worry. I have my concerns that they're comfortable playing the short to intermediate game, establishing more running dominance by having a rotation and just winning the games out that right. But
It-
it sucks. I hate it, but it is what it is.
It's funny. Colby Conway, friend of the show, he DM'd me earlier. I just now saw it a few minutes ago, and he said in all caps, "Mahomes at 7. Is Nate signing your paycheck?" and my response to that was that, look, man, I think that Mahomes is as good of Mahomes and Reed. I think that they're as good of a bet as anybody for Mahomes to end up with 4,500 plus yards and 40 plus passing touchdowns. Like it's just the reality of it. One of the things he has working against him is the Chiefs have a really good defense. They can limit the need for them to score a bunch of points. But like I have the top 4 quarterbacks with Allen and Lamar and Daniels and Hurts, the guys that I think that bring the rushing upside. They're in a tier together. But then after that, I have a tier of Baker, Joe Burrow, and Mahomes, of the guys that I just have full faith in as passers that I think could very well end up having high passing touchdowns and get the job done in that fashion. I'm just like, I don't think he should be in that top 4 or 5 range like he was for several years, but I'm also not going to be the guy that bets against Mahomes and Andy Reid to the point to where I'm going to bury him any further than that. So, yeah, that's about it as far as I can drop Mahomes.
Yeah. Aiden, who do you think is going to disappoint this year?
Yep. I hate to say it because this guy has such a proven
Josh
track
Allen.
record on
Yep.
high-powered offense. No. I'm not you. Okay. Baker. This sounds spicy, but Baker Mayfield. Like, what if the loss of Lee? Like, first of all, he rushes some, but not really any for fantasy-wise. First of all, what if the loss of Liam Cohen is a bigger deal than we're all thinking right now? And second of all, based on Bucky Irving's efficiency, what if they just give him a lot more touches and just ride him more than they did last year? Like, I'm not saying Baker Mayfield, don't stay away, don't touch him. He will bust, but I'm saying I can at least paint you a picture to where there's a couple outs here to where he will disappoint possibly, if that makes sense. So if I had to go with one guy at the top 12, that would probably be the guy.
So, Aiden, the question that I had after the draft was, what was Tampa's reason for drafting Igbuka? What was that because they want to give the keys to Baker again and they trust that he can, take on this prolific offense and make him even more dangerous? Or was it because they don't trust what Chris Godwin's recovery was like? They know Mike Evans is getting older. Was it a combination of the two? And I'm asking that not as hey, I disagree with the fact that he's a bust, because Baker was, when I look at those names, if I truly just name, alone, Baker easily to me is kind of the one that's like, one of these things doesn't belong entirely, but why? Because he's done it,
Yeah. Yeah, you bring up a good thing there. I've been thinking about this a lot since you just asked it, and I think the drafting of Ibuka is more of a future thing. Like, I think it's protecting against what if Mike Evans not flames out, but what if he doesn't come back and what if he retires or he shows his age? What if Chris Godwin doesn't come back from his second torn ACL in the last handful of years? I think there's a lot of outs. I think Ibuka's more of an insurance policy for year 1 and then a really good future asset for year 2 and beyond.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And so I think for me, I think we've kind of all discussed it. I think Bo Nix is probably the most likely to disappoint based off of where we're at. I think the touchdown rate in the second half of the year really skewed those numbers to make them look really good. 29 passing touchdowns is a fantastic year 1 number. Also a lot of danger plays sprinkled in there. So, he could definitely get better in year 2. Quarterbacks tend to see the field a little bit better, but just 2 years ago, we saw CJ Stroud come out and have a fantastic year 1 and then take a step back last year. So when you see a guy who performs that well in year 1, the instinct is almost to be like, well, was it too good to be true? And therefore, we can kind of see it as a little bit of a regression situation in a spot like that. So, boys, that's the quarterback talk for 1 through 12. And before we get out of here, we want to shout out our good friends at Dynasty Decks. It is draft season, so we are all craving those fantasy football championships. And if you're going to immortalize your victory, what better way to do it than by getting your Dynasty Decks championship plaque? Dynasty Decks or Dynasty Deck, thedynastydecks.com. They give you fully customizable championship plaques for any fantasy football league, any format, best ball, offense, IDP, doesn't matter. All you got to do is use the promo code FRAMES to receive that $5 off the purchase price. Very affordable compared to other market prices on other websites. All you got to do is go over to the dynastydex.com today. So, fellas, that's it for tonight. We talked about our top 12 quarterbacks. We all agreed Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson are at the top of the heap. That tier 1 is pretty well established, and everything else is kind of a mess. So we're going to get into more of that mess next week when we talk about our. So we're going running backs next week.
Yep. Yeah.
We're not going to talk about those other quarterbacks.
No, we're not talking about the QB2s, man. We got to move on.
Yeah, we're going to start talking about
No QB.
no QB2s. We're going to talk about those running backs who are ranked 13 through 24 next week. And then after that next week, then we'll go through running back 12 through running back 1. So same bad time, same bad channel next week. I'm Red Man. You can find me at RManuel Sports on X. Aiden can be found at AWineGartner13. Nate at Nate Markham. And Drew at Drew3MR. We're 4th and Frames. For my boys, I'm Red Manuel signing us out. Toodles.